Hey, I'm LaVeist. He's Derek ClaVille, and you're tuned into LaVeist and ClaVille. We give it to you straight the way it is from a black male's perspective. So let's get right to it. Today's show, Justice for George Floyd, Part 4. April 20th, 2021. After 2 days, 10 hours of deliberation by 12 jurors, the verdict against former police officer Derek Chauvin was read, and he was guilty on all charges. The world took a collective deep breath and exhaled, and finally, justice was served. Or has it really finally been served? I know, Eric, for me, I was stunned, not shocked, a little bit stunned, but then also relieved because I actually thought that he would get the lesser of the charges. I thought that he wasn't going to get off, but that he would get the lesser of the charges. And a lot of this is cautious optimism comes from, our experience of dealing with these kinds of cases all of our lives. I mean, we talked about it in the show, talking about Rodney King. So to see the jury come back with a guilty on all counts and that he did, in fact, murder Mr. George Floyd, I mean, it was, as we say, I think everybody collectively did exhale.
Yeah. Well, we talked about it on the last episode, leading up to this deliberation. We talked about remembering George Floyd, remembering Rodney King, remembering Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Philando Castile. The list goes on and on and on. But the feelings that I had when I heard guilty on all charges, it wasn't celebration. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, it was really mixed emotions. Right. I was really full. My wife and I watched it together. I was full. My wife cried. I had, my eyes were watering myself, because I was thinking about it. I was saying to myself that, he's guilty, but he's still alive, right? He's guilty. George Floyd's dead, right? Right. He's guilty. All these other witnesses, all these people that were involved, especially, I think about that little girl, that little 8, 9, 10-year-old little girl that witnessed a man being murdered. That's going to stick with her the rest of her life. We talk about the teenager who had the courage to film it. Right. I mean, to stay there.
And if she had not filmed it, when you look at that incident report, the first report about the case, if she had not filmed it, God knows.
Hey, Will, and we'll talk about that, a little bit later in the next episode, how, the DOJ now is going to investigate because, like you said, it came out in the trial. If you look at that very first incident report, you would think nothing happened, right? So the cover-up. But, back to the trial itself and the verdict, it's still kind of hard to talk about it. It's still kind of hard to wrap your mind around, that, it's the build up to all of this. It's the build up to, of course, George Floyd galvanized the murder of George, which we now know is the murder of George Floyd. Now, former officer and now convicted felon Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. It galvanized the world over the issue of Black Lives Matter, the world over the issue of excessive force, the world over the issue that the systematic racism, the world around the issues of just caring, of humanity of Black and brown people, Will. His life wasn't in vain, right? But but you'll hate for someone to have to go through this, for quote unquote people to think that their lives meant something. But we know his life meant something to millions of people.
Certainly meant a lot to his family, and that's Absolutely. What I was thinking about as you talked about the little girl and all the people who were traumatized. I was thinking about my first experience of being traumatized with police brutality happened to me as a kid in elementary school when Randolph Evans, 1976, 15-year-old kid, growing up in my neighborhood, neighboring neighborhood, East New York, Brownsville, in Brooklyn. And he was shot point blank by a police officer who came on the scene. He's on the corner with his friends. comes on the scene. The police officer has a conversation with them and then pulls out his revolver and just shoots him in the head point blank. And that officer, after a year, the case, he gets off on a temporary insanity. And then after another year or so in asylum or whatever, he's out and he's able to continue with his life. It was a major, major case in New York at that time, like the cases that we see today.
Right.
And he got off on temporary insanity, was able to go on with his life. And those of us as little kids were exposed to that. It traumatized us, long term, not to mention those who were actually there and were present, not to mention his family, his mother, and so forth. And so one of the things that happened is they established a scholarship fund, Randolph Evans Scholarship Fund, still exists now. Many have gotten it. And one of my brothers was actually the first one. Actually, Thomas LaVeist, who was on the show with us, was one of the first recipients of that fund. And so found myself thinking about that and thinking about how you see the list of names. And Randy oftentimes is not even on the list of names of people who have been brutalized by police. But it's like that trauma of how it has even impacted me and shaped me here now as an adult in terms of how have viewed police over the years and what I've taught and told my sons, and daughter over the years about how to interact with police. So I just think about when you mention the trauma, I think about Mr. Floyd's family and how strong they were. And in giving my condolences, I also just celebrate them and how strong that they were able to endure this and represent him and represent other families that have gone through this trauma. If you watch them having to deal with the media and watch them having to speak out and how they carry themselves, I mean, it's just very, phenomenal carrying yourself through the trauma.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the trauma and going back to Brother Evans, the one that you witnessed, being murdered.
Mm-hmm.
You still.
Well, I didn't witness. I wasn't there, but it was, as a child, that was going on in the neighborhood, and so I didn't personally witness it, but I was absolutely affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, but think about it. I mean, you still remember it to this day.
That's right.
So just imagine the people that saw it, right? We go back to the humanization of George Floyd as well. How they humanize him as a human being going through life, going through struggles. Mm-hmm. Because the defense tried to use his drug addiction, saying that his drugs, he caused his own death.
Right. He caused,
how could he cause his own death? I say to anybody, I don't care if you're The Rock, Arnold Schwarzenegger, whoever, but somebody, Shaquille O'Neal, somebody put their knee on your neck for 9.5 minutes. You will meet the same fate as well because you're cut off oxygen flow to the brain and the organs, man. And just watch it. I play back Will, him calling out to his mother, him saying, please, I can't breathe, to the point where he was saying, please, I can't breathe. I'll cooperate, whatever you need, just let me up, to the point he knew he was going to die. Right. He said, this is it. He started calling his mother. His bodily fluids started to release. And when your fluids start to release, involuntarily, that your body's going through a type of shock, right? And even we would go back and watch the tape and listen to the EMTs that came on the scene. Even after the EMTs came on the scene and felt his pulse, asking, "Hey, let's let him up," he still stayed on his neck.
Right.
Even after he was dead, the EMTs still. They were like, okay, time to let up. They actually had to kind of pat Derek on the shoulder and say, hey, we need to start, some type of life-saving measures. And they just basically threw him like a piece of beef, onto the gurney and started, in vain. It was in vain. Life-saving measures inside the ambulance. Right. They knew he was dead on the scene. But again, I go back to the look on now convicted felon Derek Chauvin's face. I go back to how cavalier he was, how arrogant and cocky he was.
Right. No concern for humanity at all. Just
At all.
cold. And to the end, even he tried to keep that face in the end, and as he was let out of the courtroom. But we saw some changes later. But go ahead.
Yeah, the changes in the mugshot. You saw his eyes red. You saw it, puffy.
The sign of reality setting in. Yeah.
Let me tell you, when that door slams behind you, and it's just you and those four walls, reality sets in. And he's facing 40 years now of, that type of confinement. Right now he's in solitary confinement, they say, for his own safety. Really his own safety. So they're protecting him now. As a matter of fact, part of the investigation, I hope, by the DOJ is with the corrections department, where the warden at that time pulled all Black corrections officers from actually guarding him, believing that African-American officers are going to,
Really?
they were going to take revenge. So again, we talk about trust in police, but do police have trust in us? Right? Do police, and we'll talk about this in our next episode when we look at solutions, are African Americans seen as untrustworthy by police systems, or is this the police just another part of the systematic racism?
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking about as a jury, as you were mentioning, the things that actually happened and the things that they actually saw as the evidence. I have we haven't been able to hear from the jury. I'm sure at some point we will hear what they were actually thinking, but you got to give it to the jury because of the evidence and the perspective on the evidence that they were able to see. People need to realize it's not the same as what we were seeing on television. And they had to see a lot of that stuff up close, and that gives you a different perspective. And they have very clear rules from the judge and how they had to go about judging this case. So a lot of the people who would say, the video speaks for itself, he's guilty, that's it. In these kinds of cases, it doesn't just work that way. There are different videos, different angles, different information that you're getting from different people who were there. And all of that is what becomes the story by which you make your judgment on. And then you got the prosecution who is painting a certain picture. You got the defense that's trying to poke holes in that. And so it's really incumbent on a jury to be able to wade through all those things. And one of the things that I was concerned about and why I thought that they would just get them on the lesser charges is that I had forgotten that the jury actually wasn't sequestered throughout. I mean, they were able, you want them to be on their honor to not read the news or the paper or talk with people in the family, but they weren't isolated like some other juries have been in the past. And I think that the experience of seeing Rodney King, or the experience of seeing the uprising that happened last summer, 2020, unlike maybe some other juries that they may have been oblivious to what the possible reaction could be and maybe less sensitized, I think that they were aware of that. And my hope is that being aware of all of the context that's going on actually made them look at the evidence, not out of fear, not out of, well, if we don't convict him, then there's going to be an uprising. I hope that what it did was it actually made them even more attentive and to really look at every possible aspect of this and make a vote, a decision that they made, which was guilty on all counts.
Absolutely. But there was the jurors' names are not going to be released. That was stated in the news reported this week. And, for, I believe, not just their own safety, but just for the sake of keeping the case itself above water, so there'd be no speculation. Of course, there's going to be an appeal. It's going to happen. Of course, the white female officer that shot both in his own apartment in Dallas is also appealing the case.
Right.
Her verdict, and conviction of 10 years. And imagine that 10 years for shooting somebody in their own house. So again, just blows my mind. But with this, one juror who was an alternate, and I'll say an alternate juror, who did not have a decision in the case, she was interviewed and stated, what actually, what was the moment that she believed that he was guilty? What witnesses had the most effect on them? And, she really talked about how the experts, the MEs just really explained at what point and showed in the film at what point he died.
Right.
It's like, this is where he died right here. 6 minutes in.
Right.
He's dead. So we got 3.5 more minutes.
Right.
That the knee is on the neck. And I think that's very symbolic of African American, our experience in America. Where, the system not only wants to discriminate, oppress, suppress, and kill, but it wants to humiliate.
Right.
It wants to demean. And, we look back at, as Billie Holiday put it, strange fruit hanging from the trees, the lynchings. It wasn't just enough to beat African American males and females. It wasn't enough to string them up unjustly on trees, let them hang, but they went as brutalize them, cut off genitals, beat them, set them on fire, and still let them hang for days. And
then take pictures, then take selfies, then take selfies of it.
That's what I was getting at, Will. Think about it. During that time period, people didn't have, they didn't walk around in what we call, business casual, right? You had work clothes, you had your overalls, and you had what's called, and what you and I know is church clothes, right? You had church shoes, you had good outfits. And then, but from there, people are putting on their quote unquote good outfits, and they're coming and they're standing and taking a picture. And I see, men and women standing with their children, with their families around a dead body hanging that's been decimated, that's been humiliated, that's been degraded. And him staying, and now convicted felon Derek Chauvin, knee on the neck of George Floyd after the expert said he had died at this point. To me, that was symbolic of what our experience and all those other horrific events that we've encountered as a people.
Well, I agree with you on that. I would even add to it that the reaction of some who are still dismissing, still raising doubt, still giving excuses and deflecting regarding the decision that the jury has made is an example of that. I mean, you and I, we were on Barbara Hamley's radio show, Another View, and we get a caller calling in talking about, why aren't we talking about the statistics of how African Americans die at the hands of African Americans more than they die at the hands of police and this kind of thing. As if whites don't die at the hands of other whites,
right?
Or that they die because that's how crime works. It's more about who is closest to you, and people in the same communities are actually killing each other at higher rates than it is someone else outside of your community.
Absolutely.
And again, just dismissing and not really honing in on the point of, well, are you saying essentially that it's okay for an officer of the law that we have paid as taxpayers to serve and protect us? Is it okay for this person to brutalize another human being, another citizen in this way? Is it okay that this incident started over an alleged counterfeit $20 bill?
Yeah.
Is it okay that when Black people engage with police over such minor situations that it
minor
can
offenses
to death? I mean, you think about the case of Eric Garner.
Oh my goodness.
Allegedly selling loose cigarettes on a corner, and that has to lead to death, or some of the traffic stops that we've had. And so that adds to, and I think that's in line with what you're talking about, this sense of having to brutalize, this sense of having to demean, because it's like at the root of it is almost like the reality of certain people just feel that Black people are still lesser human beings
Yeah,
lesser deserving
absolutely.
of equal justice under the law. And all we're talking about is something that's very fundamental to America: equal justice under the law, freedom, justice for all. That so when no one's saying that it's okay that black people kill other black people. We're not saying it's okay that white people kill other white people. What we're saying is that the kind of interaction that a black person has with a police officer and the expectation of coming out with your life, the same way that a white person interacts with a police officer and doesn't expect to die at that moment, we should expect the same kind of equal justice under the law. And we're not getting it because we've seen examples of white men armed and dangerous, and they're being taken into custody without
Well,
incident to
hey,
their lives. I mean,
well, as a matter of fact, on another view with Barbara Ham Lee, and you can go to at LaVeist and ClaVille and listen to that show as well. You know, there was a caller that called in and talked about how I mentioned Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof, that devil that got into him, that domestic terrorist that went into our church, Mother Emanuel, AME Church, in South Carolina. We accepted into service and sat there through Bible study. And at the benediction, pulled out those 9mm guns and killed everybody in there. The pastor, the older saints, the children, everybody, and reloaded. And they knew he was doing it. But still, he was taken without incident. Now, they knew he had a gun. They knew he had killed.
right.
But still, and they knew he was dangerous. But still, he was taken without incident. And if you go back and take a look at his manifesto, it's the same lies and the systematic racism and the racism that we talk about, you know, that was there. So, and then when they arrested him, he was hungry. And they took him in the drive-thru and got him a Whopper from Burger King. I mean, imagine that.
Imagine treating him like a human being.
Treating him like a human being.
That's
Someone who committed atrocities.
A heinous crime, dehumanize other human, but he still got treated like
a human being.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've never, you know, I don't know if that's the standard in South Carolina. If you say you're hungry and you're arrested, they'll take you through the nearest drive-thru or not. But, you know, that's what happened to him. Right. So the caller said, well, you know, using one example, you know, and that, you know, using one example of somebody white not being shot and killed or brutalized by police that killed someone else is, you know, these are lies.
Who committed a felony offense? I mean, we're not talking about somebody who committed a minor offense.
Murder, mass murder,
and he's being given a burger.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
George Floyd allegedly counterfeit bill, and he's dead at 6 minutes into it, and and the officer is still killing him even more for another 3 minutes.
And think about it. You know, we talk about, again, alleged counterfeit bill. I mean, who's counterfeiting bills these days? I mean, I don't know if he has access to it, and nothing's come out to say he has. You and I can easily be given in a transaction at a store or somewhere getting change, you know, counterfeit bills. It happens. Nobody looks at their dollar bills and goes through them and puts a line across it to ensure that every single dollar bill or the division of money is counterfeit or not. But to your point, it was a minor offense at best.
Right.
You know? And if he had an opportunity to defend himself in court, if he would have, he may have been able to prove that again. He didn't know. Somebody gave him $20.
Right.
It happens all the time. But to your point, Will, I think it's about going back to the verdict itself. It's about validation. It's not about celebration. I think it validates all of the hurt, all of the pain, all of the history that we've just discussed. It validates, you know, the things that we've gone through as a people, as Black men, as Black women. And we don't want to leave out our Black women, but we know that our Black men have been public enemy number one.
Right.
You know, in America since the very beginning, in creating all these foolish, and I call them foolish laws and public policy to try to stop progress and try to stop African American men from being able to compete on a level playing field, you know, with everyone else. Because when we are able to compete on a level playing field, history has shown, even modern times, that not only are we able to compete at a high level, but we've been able to do exceedingly and above all that could be imagined.
It's all about opportunities. It's all about equal opportunity, equal justice under the law. And I mean, I want to give our condolences to other families, such as the family of Daunte Wright, who,
Yes,
right in the midst of all of this, he lost his life in another encounter with police and was buried. I had the funeral service. Al Sharpton and other civil rights leaders were there, eulogized him. He spoke.
An officer was arrested in that case.
Yeah, and I look at the families and the level of grief that they're being forced to endure. Again, under a circumstance it's at best a minor offense, and it has to go to that extreme that it's a loss of life. And here's a young man had his whole life ahead of him, and also has a child. So now this is his child has to grow up without a father. Again, all because of this kind of interaction over a minor offense, and because we're not looking at people of color, we're not looking at Black people as being worthy of this equal treatment of justice and humanity. And it's something that has been at the root of this nation since its founding. It's something that is an ongoing fight and struggle to really force America to be truly what America says it wants to be, freedom and justice for all. And we have to keep up. We have to keep up that fight. We can't get exhausted and tired. I've been hearing people talking about how it's exhausting to be Black in America. And I just caution people with using that kind of language that can get your eye and your intensity off of where it needs to be. Because being exhausted in Black America, that wasn't something that Harriet Tubman bought into. That wasn't something that Frederick Douglass bought into. That wasn't something that Ida B. Wells, you talked about the lynchings that were going on. Ida B. Wells, who bravely, as a woman and a journalist, wrote passionately about what was going on. She didn't say, it's exhausting being Black in America. You mentioned Billie Holiday. Certainly Martin Luther King was saying that, Malcolm X. So we come from a lineage of people who have been in the struggle, fighting for this liberation, equal justice under the law. And now we're up at bat. Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, we're up at bat. And so I just encourage people, we just got to stay diligent and stay focused and not adopt, these kinds of postures that ultimately, undermine the legacy of those who have come before us and continue to fight, that good fight. John Lewis getting in good trouble, fight that good fight. So as we close out, because that's what's up next. It's where are we going from here?
Right. Well, yeah, you're exactly right. Again, I think as Americans, as Black Americans and the world, because I think this case is more than just Black America. It's the world. Mm-hmm. We can take a collective deep breath and then we can exhale, but we can't stop here. The guilty verdict of now convicted felon Derek Chauvin is an example of when the system works, when those who are entrusted with the system do bad things, when those entrusted with the system actually abuse the law against citizens. We all have responsibility. We all have collective and individual responsibility. So it shows that no one can escape through their responsibility. So again, this validates, but it's not a time for celebration. It's a time for us to continue working toward solutions. And we'll talk about solutions next. So thank you again for joining us for this very special series on justice for George Floyd. He was justice served. Again, join us at LaVeist and ClaVille. Follow us, like, share, comment on Facebook, and all other social media. And we thank our producer, Ben Bailey, for his wonderful work that he's doing. And if you like this episode, join us for the next as we talk about solutions. Mm-hmm. Because to us, that's the way it is. See you next time.